Greetings and salutations. You've successfully arrived at the Bloody Disgusting Network. The passage of time will now bring you to something strange, unique, and idiosyncratic. Have a good time.
Greetings, constant listeners. It's Gen 2, The Rage Adams. I know we originally planned to drop our Bazaar of Bad Dreams coverage, but given Sai King's renewed interest in Hearts in Suspension, we opted to unlock our coverage of the collection from the Stephen King archives. For those not in the know, the Stephen King Archives is our Patreon exclusive imprint in which your losers search the vault of Stephen King material. Dusting off unpublished short stories, long-forgotten interviews, coffee-stained manuscripts, and alternate versions of your favorite tales. This particular entry was recorded in December 2021 in conjunction with our Hearts in Atlantis coverage and sees us discussing Hearts in Suspension in full. Published in 2016 and edited by King's longtime mentor Jim Bishop, the book features an original essay by King entitled 5 to 1, 1 and 5, 4 installments of King's Garbage Truck, a reprint of King's novella Hearts in Atlantis, 12 essays by fellow students and friends from King's college days, and a gallery of period-specific paragraphs and documents. We time travel back to UMO and talk about it all. And if you like this episode, become a member of the Barons, our Patreon account, where you can unlock hundreds of hours worth of exclusive content, from this Stephen King archival series, to our Dark Tower detours, to over a dozen commentaries on all your favorite Stephen King movies, to spin-off series like Talkin' Hawkins and Crichton Cast. We also have book episodes for You Like It Darker, Holly, Fairy Tale, Billy Summers, Gwendy's Final Task. They're all in there. If that weren't enough, we also have a 24/7 Discord community where we play trivia, host watch-alongs, and make friends that, frankly, we'll have for life. Subscribe now through the link in the description of this episode, or you can visit www.patreon.com/thebarons. For now, allow us to keep your hearts in suspension, and we'll be back with a Bazaar of Bad Dreams next week, over long days and pleasant nights.
My friendship to all of you precludes my involvement with any one of you. But if you wanna make love, then I do too, and I'll be right there behind you. All in the name of oh, all in the name of oh, all in the name of oh.
Greetings, constant listeners. Rockin' Randall here to take you back in time. That's right.
Ooh, good song.
It's time for, the fun thing about Huey Lewis is like, I love him, but his hits, they're all like, gonna go back in time, and then it's like, the power of love.
Do you?
To be square. Yeah.
Right.
It's all like, I always call it like beer and burger music.
Oh man, yeah.
Because like growing up, I always felt like every time I walked into like a themed restaurant, like Huey Lewis was playing some song. It was just like either "Do You Believe in Love" or like "Power of Love," and it's all. I mean, even his voice sounds like it's like coming through the a '50s diner or some shit like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I love
hearing
hearing
about
that.
his murdering Jared Leto music.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Well, welcome to another episode of Huey Cast. Talking Huey.
I would do that.
I would too. I love Huey. No, we're here for another Archives episode. Archives, it's our Patreon exclusive series in which we pour over King's rare uncollected works to see what dreams may come. Today, in honor of our month-long coverage of Hearts in Atlantis, we're climbing in the stinky bed of King's Garbage Truck for yet another look at his formative college years. Specifically, we're discussing the 4 pieces he shared in 2016's Hearts in Suspension, as well as the essay 5 to 1, 1 and 5. That's what it's called, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's featured in that rare collection. We're also going to talk about Huey Lewis. Let's say hello to each other. Mike, say hello and tell me what are your thoughts on garbage?
This is Michael Sports Rothman. Good old reference to our University of Maine alum Huey Lewis. Not true in the slightest. Maybe it is actually. I've never looked it up, but I doubt that Huey Lewis went from University of Maine to San Francisco, where he gave us those killer '80s jams. I love this. I love talking garbage. I don't like garbage. I like the band Garbage, but I don't like touching garbage. Blood and guts. Give me all that. I can deal with that. But anytime there's poo poo caca or garbage, I'm out. I'm a germaphobe. So, but I'm not scared of this.
Okay.
So I'm excited to talk about this. Yeah.
Lewis attended Cornell University in Ithaca.
Oh, wow. So he was kind of close, not too far.
Yeah, not too far. Jen, say hello and thoughts on Garbage.
Hi, this is Jen, only happy when it rains, Adams, and I love Garbage, but only the songs, only the music. Yeah, I don't like trash that much. It's gross. It's stinky, and I don't like it when it like fills all the way up to the top of the can, and you throw something in and it bounces back out. Like, what the fuck? I guess I just should take my trash out more. But yeah, this is I love the thought of this garbage truck column, though, especially reading the essay where he's talking a little bit about how he wrote it, and I was like, he named it Garbage Truck for a reason, so it's just fascinating. It's like this little window into his unfiltered mind. So I love that kind of garbage. And sometimes trash can be fun, like trashy stuff.
Yeah. Trash man. Trash can man.
Yeah, trash can man.
True, yeah.
I'll say I have a complicated relationship with trash because my friend's daughter, when she was really young, she liked to play a game called Trash, where she would say, "Ew, it's a stinky sock," and then we would have to throw it away. And I started doing a bit where I like to eat the trash, and she thought that was really, really funny. To the point where now she has a little brother and she's told him that I like to eat trash. So whenever they see me, they're like, "Uncle Randy, eat trash." And then they like hand me, like they go, "Here is a banana peel." And I have to pretend to eat it. And I go, "Mom, mom, 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 mom," like Cookie Monster. And then I eat trash. And they go, Uncle Randy, do you eat the trash? Like they always ask me like that question.
Are you really?
And I said, and I have to say, yes, I do eat the trash. And then now Greta, her name's Greta, she's getting old enough that she's asking me like, "But do you really eat the trash?"
Oh my god!
And I have to keep it going. So
yeah, I mean, it's like, is Santa real, and does Uncle Randy actually eat trash?
Yeah, like she's genuinely curious. Like, do you actually eat trash?
Do you do the thing where you like put it behind your face and you like lower it while your mouth is like pom 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 pom?
I've tried that once and it didn't get the laughs that my Cookie Monster shoes get. So
you went back.
I go where the laughs are, I
go. Well, that's the thing with kids. You find what they find funny and you do it 3,000 times.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then they will be happy. I don't want children, but I'm very good with children because I understand that basic rule.
Yeah.
So okay.
Well, this is important. This is an important moment though, because I mean, if you recall, 3 years ago there was a huge heated Frost Nixon debate between Justin and I over who was the trash mouth of this podcast.
Oh yeah, it
looks like it's been settled. It looks like it's been settled though.
Yeah.
It's me now.
It's trash mouth Colburn. It's.
I mean, I feel like eating trash does trump anything else.
It's true. Does. I literally have a trash mouth. Well, you're still Eddie Mike, and that makes Justin, I guess, Bill now.
I guess he's Bill now. So how about that?
Yeah.
The rules have changed.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to read a section from 5 to 1, 1 and 5, where he talks about how we first got sort of the Garbage King column. So I'm going to read it. Mm-hmm. Eventually, I did publish in Hubris, and my mother was, of course, chuffed, as she was when I got a major part in the Insect Comedy by Joseph and Carol Capek. But hardly anyone on campus read the literary magazine. Later on, I achieved a much wider campus readership with a weekly column called King's Garbage Truck. I had written a long, rambling stream of consciousness letter to the editor during my first weeks in the university cabins, and it caused a stir when it was published. I guess it was funny in a sophomoric way, and why not, since the guy who wrote it was a sophomore? But I don't remember very much about it. There might have been something in it about Poe being a necrophiliac, but I could be wrong. When the editor, David B., asked me if I'd like to write a weekly column, the first thing to jump into my mind was better typewriters. I said yes immediately, and wrote that column every week for the rest of my time at the university. I didn't think about the subjects of those columns much, if at all, until 2 or 3 hours before the deadline. Then I would ramble into the offices of the main campus in my cut-off gum rubber boots, find a vacant typewriter. Not only were they better, they were electric, and rattle something off. I began with movie reviews, record reviews, and live events, dance recitals, experimental one-act plays, but these quickly came to bore me, and I moved into more humorous and often surreal territory. Eventually, I became famous, at least in the 500 acres or so that comprised our campus. I never cared much about that. To me, me, being famous has always seemed like getting a nicely wrapped present, only to discover a rather ridiculous-looking tie inside the box. You say thank you, then wear it as seldom as possible. If I may wax Shakespearean, I view seeking the bubble reputation, either in the cannon's mouth or on some red carpet, as a waste of time. To repeat, the real attraction of being a columnist for the main campus was the typewriters. I loved going in late in the afternoon, after the journalism majors had left, and I had the place mostly to myself. I'd sit down and write whatever happened to be in my head on that particular day. There was always plenty. In those days, my head was so crammed with story ideas that I sometimes felt it would burst.
Wow.
So yeah, this essay is from Hearts in Suspension, which came out in 2016 and is sort of a curious little project. It was helped put together by King, but also some of his fellow classmates that he went to school with at the University of Maine back from 1966 to 1970, and as well as one of his old professors who was very formative in his creative writing training. And so
Jim Bishop.
Yes, and so the book is basically comprised of the novella Hearts in Atlantis from the book, as well as this essay, which runs about 55, 60 pages. It's a long essay, and it's really King reflecting on his college years, and I think a lot of the things that went into Hearts in Atlantis, and then also 4 reprinted columns from the garbage truck that are relevant, I think, to the themes of Hearts in Atlantis. We're going to talk about those, as well as essays written by some of his former classmates. And I have a fun little bit of King's Dominion here that I want to share with you guys. One of the things he said when I was reading articles about the campus event where they debuted the book was that when King read some of the essays from his friends and they would mention him, they described him as rather hairy and slovenly. And he said that was kind of jarring for him. And he described it as being like Tom and Huck at their own funeral, which is what he said about our podcast.
Oh,
too.
interesting.
So I think he likes that phrase. But I think that's his go-to phrase for whenever people talk about him in ways where I guess they're being very frank about him. Mm-hmm. Which was just a fun coincidence to me. If you listen to our part 2 of our Hearts in Atlantis episode, we talk pretty extensively about Hearts in Suspension, but I think we're going to tackle different sides of it today in this episode. We'll probably go a little bit deeper, and we'll talk about some of these columns as well as they relate to Hearts in Atlantis, and I guess the general theme of political awakening, loss of innocence, loss of idealism, and which is, I think, sort of the running theme of it all, but then also a certain kind of, I don't know, rough edge nostalgia is how I'll phrase it. But yeah, Mike, what was your thoughts on this essay? This was your first time reading it, right?
Yeah, so this has been a wild run. I mean, as someone who loves just getting into the nitty gritty of where King is when he's written stuff, and just kind of more autobiographical notions of his own id or personality in his work. Like this run, just kind of reading Hearts in Atlantis, the book, going into the movie, obviously, and then going into this part right here. This felt like an early Christmas present, or should I say an early Kingmas present? Because, like, I mean, this essay itself, it starts out with him kind of meditating on the swinging 60s, to borrow from our favorite Mike Myers performance. But it starts out that way. But I really do think that he kind of at the halfway point, when it stops being less about portraits he's trying to remember the 60s and more of like a meditation on kind of his own future and the future that he was able to forge. And one of the takeaways I had from reading this essay is that I feel like he's almost guilty. He feels guilty, or feels some sense of guilt of being part of a generation that really wanted to change the future. And yet, I think no one would really argue his future's been pretty fucking great.
That's true. And survivor's guilt, man. Yeah.
Right? Like there's one of the things that really stuck out to me is, King is we all have echoes when it comes to our habits and what we have. And obviously this podcast is built on studying the echoes of King. And one of the things I found fascinating in this, essay is the fact that I don't know, maybe since Hearts in Atlantis, like he's been obsessed with this idea of how we deal with death, right? And how death works for our minds, and the concept of memory. And one of the things I read in my own notes by reading like Why We're in Vietnam and the fate of John Sully when he's on the highway, and all the things start cascading down, the first thing I thought of was, wow, this reminds me of Life of Chuck with Wishes and If It Bleeds. And then I also started thinking about, concepts of memory and what he's wrestling with there, and how I talked a lot about that on our Lisi story episode, and how, so much of what Lisi knows and what so much Scott tells her is based on personal memory. But the thing with memory, which I digressed on longer than I'm digressing right now, how could you believe it, was the idea that, memory, even in the very instant that it's happening, is awash in subjectivity. Whatever you're seeing is based on your own perspective and your own sort of, whatever you're understanding and processing of that particular memory. And that's in that instant. Now add on a year, even add on a day, a week, year, month, anything, that point of view and that sort of awareness of what that was and what it meant to you is going to shift and change. So there really is no objective truth or even any semblance of truth of what memory is, because the longer you go, the more distorted it gets, which is why I think King was probably surprised at him being Harry at that time. And he admits as much in this essay of saying, well, I only knew, this is my memory. This is what I'm going to glean. I'm going to lean a little bit on Google, but this is what I have. But him dealing with that conclusion that he gets to, that keeps bringing back on this essay, is that what if all of my entire life, what if this entire future, all my memories are just a flash in the pan when it comes to that car crash that he had with his friend. And it's very similar to like An Occurrence in Owl Creek Bridge, which is a short film that became a Twilight Zone episode. Great episode, by the way, or great short film. You need to watch it. But that's been very influential in King as well. And I find it fascinating that at this age, in 2016 when he wrote this, and this is something that he's kind of contending with in 1999, even before the accident with Hearts in Atlantis, with the Sully story, and obviously with Life of Chuck in 2020 with, for the If It Bleeds story, he has that fear that like maybe he just wakes up and it's all been this dream, what it's all been. But I think a lot of that fear comes from just reading this essay, the guilt of like, well, I did find success, even though I did kind of, as he mentions here, buy in, to borrow from Chris McDonald from SLC Punk. Like he kind of bought into it, and I don't know. Sorry, that's a long-winded way of saying like,
no.
There's a lot of
right.
stuff there,
Yeah.
That's kind of what I took from it all.
Think about why we're in Vietnam ends with just like refrigerators and pianos and cell phones like raining from the sky and like killing people, like, and drowning people essentially. Like it's that notion of consumerism, materialism that really took grip of that generation specifically. I mean, not to say it hasn't others, but I think, there's so much lost idealism, and I think that's really what he's reckoning with in a lot of these stories. Like what I love about Hearts in Atlantis, and we talk about this a lot in our episodes, which is that it explores the loss of innocence from multiple angles. Like it's not just this simple notion of when you're a kid, everything is great, and then when you get old, everything sucks. It's like he explores multiple moments of that. Like there is the childhood notion, but it's not simply a loss of innocence. It's a realization of it's going from seeing people as 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional.
Yeah.
And it's a necessary shift, but it's also a painful one. And then in Hearts in Atlantis, it's about, in a lot of ways, about political awareness and about the idea of living inside sort of a privileged bubble where you don't have to care about the larger world. And when you go to college or when you just enter the real world in whatever way that you do it, you really sort of you're pushed to open your mind and care about not just other people and see other people that in your orbit is 3-dimensional, but suddenly the whole world is 3-dimensional. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's really, I think, what these stories are about, which is that painful process of moving from unawareness to awareness. And I think that it's rendered so beautifully, and that's why I think we talk about this in the film. What's hard about the film is that's so hard to convey on screen that it kind of just it's we like the movie, but it kind of oozes into sort of a puddle of vague nostalgia rather than this sort of very pointed look at what innocence was lost, what idealism was lost. So yeah, Jen, how about you? Was this your first time reading this essay?
It was, yeah. It was. I remember when this came out, and I remember mentioning that I might want this book like on my Christmas list or something, and mentioning to my dad, who I thought was a huge Stephen King fan. And when I told him what it was about, he was like, kind of expressed some negativity towards these political views. And that was kind of the beginning of me thinking, like, I don't know, I've talked a lot about my dad on my other podcast, so I won't go that here, but that's it. This does kind of stick in my mind as like this beginning of a divide between us. But I hadn't read it until last night. And I just, like you said, I was blown away. I loved it. It was a lot more introspective than I was expecting. I read it, and of course, you know, being me with my experiences, I connected so much to the substance abuse experiences. Like a lot of that felt really similar to my college experience and my like early adult experience. The teaching elements I really connected to also, but yeah, this feeling of guilt I think does come across in this, but like honest guilt and like kind of like an honest reckoning with the privilege that he does have, and not in a like a defensive way. Because I think if you look at a character like Carol, like there's in one, oh gosh, the Hearts in Suspension essay, he's talking about the girl who was like this radical person or this radical like leader, and then she goes to speak and she's all dressed nicely, you know, and that kind of stood out to me as like, we all kind of clean up because that's what we are taught to do, you know? And so I think when he's writing Carol, I wonder if that's him writing who he wishes he was in college, and if he wishes he had taken it further, you know, instead of kind of, spending a lot of his time being fucked up, you know, like because there's a dichotomy here, like, especially reading Hearts in Atlantis, the short story, like, the thing that really stuck out to me there is like that really dropping out of school could be a death sentence, you know, and that the danger in that. And he has this experience with almost dying that was entirely of his own creation. You know, it is because he was being reckless with his life when there were people his own age who could have been drafted and had those near-death experiences that were not under their control, you know? So there's this element, and I hope I'm not kind of veering off, but there's this element of like, I put my life in danger because of my own choices. And there is a privilege in that, especially during this time period when so many young men his age would have been living in these super dangerous situations, like life and death situations every day, just being drafted, you know?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think that everything you're saying contributes to or feeds into, I think, one of the most affecting passages of this essay for me, which comes near the end. And I think it sums up a lot of the Hearts in Atlantis story, too. And I'll just read it really quick. He says, "What I remember best is how completely and wonderfully wrong we were about so many things, and how blind we were allowed to be, at least for a little while, to the world's harder truths. That is a near-perfect definition of mercy, I think. I believed I had discovered true love with my high school girlfriend. I believed my novel, Sword in the Darkness, would be a prize-winning bestseller. I believed passionately in the Vietnam War for 3 semesters, and just as passionately that it was wrong for another 5. I believed we could change American society, maybe even in the world, and ignored how every cause, an end to sexism, an end to racism, an end to the draft, an end to the war, eventually degenerated into childish arguments with the administration, so often just stand-ins for our parents, about our right to speak out about these things in the first place. In many cases, we lost sight of the larger issues and fell to squabbling about minutia like long hair and bell-bottom pants. Yet sometimes even a dose of reality could be okay. Sometimes we were brought face to face with the simple fact that we weren't at the center of the universe after all, and maybe that wasn't so bad." I think about that idea of recklessness a lot, which I think does stem from the idea that you are the center of the universe, you know? And this whole idea of like, I'm invincible and everything I believe is right and I'm never going to change my mind about anything. You know, it's like, it's disarming to think about college through that lens. And I think that's what he does so wonderfully in this essay, is kind of look back at this different person. And he kind of marvels at how that person grew up to be who he is today. And I think that's why he does a lot of that retrospection that you were talking about, Mike, where he was talking about, and you too, Jen, like just about teaching and drinking and like all of these things that led him to where he is. And also that idea of success. Like, how did I end up so successful after all this shit that I did, you know? And all this like complete, and we'll talk about this with the columns too, because he touches on this notion, which is just like, I was so gullible when I was young too. Like I believed whatever I was told. And and by the time I eventually did develop beliefs, like a certain sense of idealism, it came and went so quickly, right? Like so there's so many ideas, just like with the story. But yeah.
Yeah, I thought like, God, I mean, it kind of reminded me of that sentiment that Hunter S. Thompson has in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, when he's at the rat race, the dirt, I think there's like go-karts and stuff like that in the desert or something. And he has that awesome line where Hunter S. goes like, we had all the momentum. We were riding the crest of a high and beautiful wave. So now, less than 5 years later, you can go up on a steep hill in Las Vegas and look west. And with the right kind of eyes, you can almost see the high watermark, that place where the wave finally broke and rolled back. And I feel like King is finally doing that like decades later. I think that's what he was doing with Hearts in Atlantis. And I think with Hearts in Suspension, he has even more clarity. Like the thing that's so fascinating to me reading this is just, we've literally had to stop reading tweets that are political because he's so, left-leaning. And to see him kind of reckon with his Republican upbringing here is interesting, And I don't think that even 5 years later after the fact and when he was in college, he could really deal with that. Like, I think about my own sort of political reckoning, which was, surrounded by a bunch of conservatives and like kind of like King in this. And when I went to college, it was this sort of like chip away thing where I found myself saying things that a lot of my friends from high school were like, dude, you're not a conservative. You're fucking liberal, like a total liberal.
You fucking libtard.
Yeah. Like, no, but that's honestly how it was like. And I vividly remember even just reading this passage and thinking, this essay and just thinking about moments in my freshman year when I'd be still clinging on to like my high school friends that went to that college because I hadn't met my new friends in college yet. And just, talking about like the war in Iraq, and being like, I don't really know if I really think this is a smart idea. And then, them hounding me for it and like me just kind of couching my own feelings. And I remember one of my closest friends at that time, who was just an astounding soul, reminds me a lot of like some of the characters that King describes here, specifically his roommate that he talks about, Harold. Reminded me of Harold actually. My friend Zach Melick, he was just like, he's like, what's wrong with being liberal? And it was like this kind of eye-opening thing because it's like I always considered myself I was always a Democrat, but I never really talked about it because in Catholic school it's like, they don't like that too much. And so I always kind of kept it to myself, and it really was like an eye-opening thing. And so to watch King slowly drift away from what he knows to, what at the time was very alien to him. But now, I mean, especially when he writes this in 2016, I mean, we're going into the Trump election.
This was published like a few days after Trump won, yeah.
Which is crazy. So like he is just all in the front lines and talking about politics. So I imagine a lot of that came from that time too, of just being like, God, remember the time when I was on the other side? Like, how did I deal with that? And to have that sort of retrospect, and like he does a really good job in not really kind of putting on the rose tinted lenses. Like he's pretty pragmatic about most of his discussions in the past, and I think there's some sobering moments because of it in this essay. I think it's really important to read if you're a constant reader, for sure. So
yeah, what I think is interesting is that these days we see him reckon with his past his past activism and his past progressivism, and as much as he thinks he can speak clear-eyed about a lot of it all, you can tell that it had a impact on him. Like the disappointment it carries with him. I would say that he is, I wouldn't necessarily call him left-leaning these days. I'd say he's a bit of a centrist. Like but the thing is, I understand that. I'm not criticizing him, but like he's, when he tweets, he criticizes the Squad a lot, for like voting against certain things that Nancy Pelosi wants to do. And I remember he was critical of Bernie Sanders, and he was talking about, he's like, I went through this with McGovern, George McGovern was a very progressive politician in the 60s who wanted to pull out of Vietnam, and then he got fucking walloped, and I think with Bernie, he was kind of trying to say, like, I'm not buying into this because I was disappointed before by people who had this far left politics. We have to be pragmatic about this. We have to not be idealistic about this. Like AOC, Ilhan Omar, like, stop voting against the Democrats, because you think you're making a statement, but we understand that that this is not how politics works, and you sort of have to play within the system. I very much disagree with that sentiment, but I also completely understand how he got there. And the thing is, maybe when I'm his age, I'll feel the same way. But it's like, because I think it's those years of disappointment, that loss of idealism, and that witnessing over the course of 40 years or whatever, how much the country has not gotten better, and how much that sense of hope and activism that they tried to foster back then, it always, and what he says that is so true is that so often that idealism curdles into bureaucratic squabbles and bullshit. And Anna Marie Cox talked about this on our Hearts in Atlantis episode too, about how hard it is once you get involved in any form of politics to not get swept up in the bullshit. The real issues always fade behind culture war bullshit and squabbling. I mean, look at all this Joe Manchin bullshit. Like, it's so depressing. And that's what it is. That's what politics is, which is that various other interests get their grubby little paws in, and nobody can do anything because it's all about these little things that divide people that ultimately just hurt the greater public. So anyways, that's a rant, but I'll just say that it's interesting to read King's tweets now. I roll my eyes at them a lot, but I also don't think he's, he obviously, this is a political belief system that he has cultivated over many, many, many years, and a lot of disappointment. So I understand where he's coming from a lot.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, I think it kind of to tie it to teaching, like that's kind of how I remember hearing about new teachers. Like, you come out of the gate and you're like, oh, I've got all these exciting ideas. Like, this lesson's going to be fantastic. Every child can learn. Every child is a gene, and you're just so excited and you're so idyllic. And then you get beat down by the system slowly. And so then you get veteran teachers and they're like, no, but you're not going to be able to make that lesson work. Like, just don't worry about it. And I think there's a place for both. Like, we need the squad and we need like the people who have been experienced in politics and know how to actually get stuff done. It's just finding that balance. And I can see definitely from King, like, reading about how disappointed he was through all of his experiences here, and how I feel like he kind of feels like he maybe missed out on an opportunity to make some changes. One of the parts that stood out was talking about missing an opportunity to go to Woodstock and then not making it to the Chicago convention. And there's this feeling of looking back on his life and seeing these pivotal moments, and some that he took and some that he didn't, and just wondering, what might have been if he had gotten to the convention or something,
Yeah. One of the things I wrote on the side notes when I was trying to understand how to use the fucking comments on pages. It's a FYU to Apple. If anyone at Apple, if one of the suits at Apple's listening to the archives episode in their Patreon,
we got some notes for you.
Fix your fucking comment section. Anyway, one of the things I laughed about is, lately we talked about this in our Discord, is that, like, I feel like, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been pretty black-pilled in the same way that, like, Randall and I, whenever we get together to drink, it's usually just to talk about how much we hate everything about the certain big government and corporations and yada, yada, yada. And a lot, there is an ebb and flow to get to that point. And it's what you're talking about, Randall, and like where he's at currently. King is in his 70s. He's had decades of disillusionment and disappointment and maybe success and maybe some things. And you're going to have twists and turns. Looking back, I just mentioned how I came into college, surrounded by conservatives and became a bleeding heart, even more of a bleeding heart liberal than I already was. Kind of easy to have that way when you grow up with Jewish parents. But anyway, all to say is that, you do have changes, like I remember leaving college with my history degree in, Latin American studies and being calling myself a staunch socialist / social democrat, which, I'm not George Carlin now, where I'm not nihilistic to the point where I'm just going to reject the whole system. But I do acknowledge that even after leaving grad school And that was undergrad, but then grad school, really having some realities of things and being able to go like, well, I could sit here, keep fighting for this world that we live in, but I have my own battles to deal with, like I have my own things that that's taking up my day to day, which is what King kind of gets into in this essay. And I think now where I'm at, which is 37. Yep, that's it, right? 37 years old. I am at the point where I do feel sort of what he does right here in his essay. I want to read a little section that I thought was like, wow, I literally wrote like black-pilled. He goes, Laura D wanted to look her best, and there was nothing wrong with that. This Laura D is the woman that Jen was talking about before that created this disillusionment. Hadn't thousands of college students all across America gotten clean for Jean in the spring and summer of 1968? But that wouldn't wash, at least not with me, because the times weren't the same. In 1968, there had still been hope for the democratic process. By 1970, most of us believed that the so-called democratic process was a joke, and the only choices were either full-scale revolt or going along to get along. And that's kind of where my mind's at right now. Like, I tweeted the other day that was like, and some people took it totally out of whack, but, I basically was saying, like, I think it's funny that we have tweets every day being like, oh, if only we could tax the billionaires or whatever, if the billionaires could be taxed. And I was like, yeah, but if you think for a second that that's going to change any of our public services, it's not. Like, and that's where my head's at now. It's like, I'm so disillusioned. Like, I mean, we went through a pandemic, and I'm sitting here paying off all my fucking taxes despite not having a lot of money. And I'm sitting here trying to get through it, and I see what the government does. I've seen what the government it's all action, and they don't do a lot. I'm sorry. And so I remember when a lot of people were replying to me, being like, "Well, what about museums and hospitals and blah blah?" And I was like, "Well, first off, the healthcare industry is a whole other thing. If you really think that the tax dollars are helping you out, and when you go to a hospital, I'm sorry, but it's not." Anyway, I could go off on a soapbox, but that's where I'm at right now. That's my mindset. Is like I am so rejected from the idea that A, we could really do make any other change, and B, that the government is there to actually make change for us. Because, I mean, the proof is where we're at right now, and this is where I'm at as a 37-year-old trying to live my midlife. And my midlife has been nothing but fucking constant hurdles. And so, sure, of course I'm going to have that sort of black-pilled sentiment. And so... But
I mean,
maybe
look
when
at the
I'm
Build
70,
Back Better Act. Yeah, it's like this whole thing not passing is such a joke. Like
Yeah.
it's comical. It's like they can't do fucking anything.
No.
And I'm not trying to get into politics here, but I think a good analog to what you're saying, Mike, and this story about this woman named Laura, because like King's whole thing is, as Jen mentioned, it's like this is a woman who was on the front lines of a lot of protests, and suddenly when they had this sort of assembly to discuss a lot of these issues in a more professional setting, he noticed that she wore makeup and she dressed a little bit nicer. And that really put him off because what he's saying is like, this isn't about fitting into the system and trying to change it from within. It's about tearing the system down because the system does not work.
Exactly.
And that is just accurate. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, pretty much everybody who tries, many outsiders who try to get in, the forces of nature of politics inevitably make you sort of mold into that form, because then you start to think, well, obviously my outsider ways don't work, but maybe I can do something from within, and then suddenly you become the thing you always hated.
Yes.
And that's and the modern analog is AOC, and I love
or even
AOC, but
even Obama, who has a longer tenure that we can look at. I mean,
but I'd say about like Obama, it's like if you actually looked at a lot of what his policies were, it's like a lot of it was kind of just marketing.
I know, but I just think of like when he was like, he had the opportunity to be,
oh sure, yeah,
and he
then
didn't,
bailed Wall
and then,
Street out,
and
yeah.
Exactly. So that's what I like.
But I think AOC, it's like and this is, I'm not getting explicitly political, I'm just using an example, which is that for a lot of people, she was a bright, shining ray of hope. This was like a former bartender, somebody who was connected to the working class, who had socialist beliefs and beat a corporate Democrat in a state where that never happens. And that was a huge deal. That never fucking happens. Like a grassroots person beating this corporate Dem who didn't give he didn't take her seriously at all. And, but then now that she's in, I think she does a lot of great work. She's very pro-union. She does a lot of great work. But if you look at her voting record, it's like she's kind of just fallen in line. And that's what a lot of people criticize her for, is that she votes in tandem with a lot of the corporate Democrats. And that is... something that has disappointed people who saw her as sort of this shining ray of hope. And I think, but that's the problem. I think anytime you sort of start standing a politician is you watch them become crushed by the system because they all do.
Totally. Yeah, that's what happens. Well, and yeah, I remember I had this kind of awakening a couple of years ago reading this book about feminism, and it was like, we're probably not going to topple the patriarchy in our lifetimes. Like, and that was, I remember reading that and being like, oh, but like, that's real. Like, the system we're talking about is so fundamental to the air that we breathe. Like, every fabric of our being is tied up in this system. And there are a lot of people, it's like the Matrix. It's like there are a lot of people that don't want this system to go away, even though they may claim they do, or they want aspects of it to go away. And so,
well, if it services them, yeah,
exactly.
And it does.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is it overwhelmingly services, rich white people. And so,
it does.
So they love the system. They're like, why change it?
Exactly.
Like they just didn't like Trump because his tweets were annoying. Like, like nothing's really changed since Biden's become president,
right,
except for there's fewer annoying tweets.
Right. There's just people are more savvy with all their bullshit, But like you were saying, Randall, like there are two ways to tear a system down. It's from without and from within. And we have to have people on both sides. And it is crucial to get inside and start making the fundamental changes that will make bigger change. Because if we just tear down, there's the vacuum, But once you get inside, like, a lot of the surface level makes sense, logical sense. And once you're inside, you start being afforded a little bit more protection than the people outside. And it's really easy, like Laura D., to get swept up in that, like you said, Anna Marie was talking about, is it starts to make sense. You start to feel more secure, and it's really easy to choose the Matrix,
Yeah, I mean, it's like the ending of Disturbing Behavior, You got blue ribbon, blue ribbon. No, I mean, but to go back to what I was ranting about, like, right now, I believe that the only solution really is just to burn everything down. But
yes,
that's where I'm at 37.
Team Firestarter.
And I'm pretty sure that's kind of where maybe King was kind of dealing with that sort of crossroads. Obviously he was, because he talked about it so much in respect to Laura D. And maybe at that age, he did feel like, well, the only solution is to just like really be the outsider that kind of takes it all down. And maybe at 70 something years old now, he believes that you can make change within. I'm hoping that I'll get back to that point at some point when I'm at 70 years old. But right now, currently, like, that's where I'm at. And so I think that's what's so astounding about reading this essay is just, him changing from Republican upbringing to where he was in college. That's not the only change politically he's ever had, Like, right. He's had multiple ones over the time. And where he's at in 2016 is even different probably politically than where he was in 1999. I mean, that was like before, that was before so much when you really think about it. Like, he was writing Hearts in Atlantis before 9/11, before, Bush and Iraq and all this other stuff. He was living in arguably what a lot of, analysts, historian scholars talk about being probably the best era to grow up in America, which was like the 90s. And so it's very interesting to kind of go from that. So I don't know.
Well, it's interesting too. I think King also has understood as he's gotten older, if you look at all the charity he does in Maine specifically, and the money he pumps into a lot of the institutions there, I think he's realized what a lot of people, I think, hopefully realizes, that local work is pretty much the best thing you can do.
Yes.
Because, the federal government's an immovable object. It's frozen in amber. It's like never going to change. And but you can make changes locally. And I think that's like the real revelation that a lot of people can come to. And King obviously is there. And as much as he rants about politics on Twitter, I think he understands that the best, and he has the means by which to affect change because he has so much money. And he's making Maine a more beautiful state, and he's trying to help it. And that's what I love about him, among many things, including his writing. What other things stood out in this essay for y'all? Like, because it really does bounce all over. I mean, we get all kinds of insight into the creation of a lot of his earlier novels, like Rage and The Long Walk. And and he talks a little bit more about Sword in the Darkness, which we talked about on an early Archives episode, as a novel that exists in his personal collections that you need like a handwritten note to read.
That area was so fucking astounding to me, because like I love the fact that he talks about how so much of his writing and so much of just his own personal well-being or spirit was just fueled by rage, like just fueled by anger, and like so much so that he doesn't even remember like thinking about any other emotion during that time.
Yeah, I
And
want to read that section since you brought
really
that up.
good.
I've got it handy
Cool.
because I thought it was really good. He writes, I had the whole range of human emotions and plenty of empathy. I just didn't have much of either to spare for myself. I rarely wondered about the things I did, and I certainly did not analyze the things I wrote. That sort of analysis happened a lot in college, in classes and in writing seminars, and with the exception of one extraordinary poetry seminar, I always loathed it. To me, those long and verbose deconstructions were not just useless, but actually antithetical to the creative process. I could always make up some sort of half-bright response when someone asked, what did you mean when you wrote so-and-so? But what I always thought was, if it's not on the page, you mutt, then it doesn't mean anything. It took me years to look back on those early stories and poems and realize how angry I was, how fucking furious through most of the time I spent at the University of Maine. There were also 3 novels written in that time: Rage, originally titled Getting It On, The Long Walk, and Sword in the Darkness. Unlike most of the stuff I wrote afterward, there is no sense of play in them, no appreciation of the absurd, no kicking up of the heels, no laughter. They're just fucking furious. In today's society, one of my stories, Cain Rose Up, would have put me under scrutiny as a possible school shooter.
I love that he admits that. Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
The poster on my side of my freshman dorm room was a large photo of Humphrey Bogart in one of his gangster roles, holding a pair of automatic pistols. I had no idea what that seemingly unquenchable anger was about. Yes, I was short of the old folding green, a classic kid working his way through college, but it wasn't that. I only had 4 pairs of jeans and 1 pair of good, i.e. polyester pants, but in those days almost all the boys wore jeans and a majority of the girls did too. I wasn't going hungry. I was no Oliver Twist asking for a second helping. Our sophomore Eagle tour guide overstated the case when it came to Commons chow. It's great, but it was far from terrible. And since I worked on the West Commons dish line, I could snark up an extra slice of pie or a dish of pudding anytime I wanted. And he basically says, I had friends, I had a sex life of sorts, hardly lush, but by no means non-existent, yet the rage was there, a steady stream of magma that came out only in the fiction I was writing after my homework was done, on weekends and in various odd corners around campus. And, although I take objection to his characterization of the long walk, which is very good, and I think it does have an appreciation for the absurd, but I do agree it's not very funny.
But I think that's a transitional novel for him. That's what I took. That's what I took away out of this, is that because he talks a little later about like the Ray Garrity character and how he dealt with the emotions of that character, and I think it's telling that out of all the Bachman books, The Long Walk is the one that we would put arguably in their top 5 of King, if not top 10. And I think that's kind of, if you really want a point of origin now, the more I think about it, I guess The Long Walk really is kind of like an origin to the King we know today. I feel like that's kind of what I got out of this, reading all of these, like his background and context into where he was writing it. But I mean, who could blame him for being this way? I mean, like when he describes like all the stuff he sees firsthand. I mean, granted, we talked a little bit about this in the King's Garbage Truck Volume 1, currently available on Patreon. God, I sound like a shill, but he talks a little bit about just, even when we were going over the history of America, one of the things that I had said going into it is just like how exciting it's going to be to see that point of view, being on the ground, when Bobby Kennedy had died, or like talking about Martin Luther King, and he does that in this essay. And so when he's discussing this, and this is, obviously with the hindsight of 40, 50 years, I can only imagine the only emotion you could feel is just absolute utter rage at just the idea that you are powerless to being sent overseas, the fact that you're powerless to having your own heroes being gunned down. And like, one of the really interesting things to me is that like I've always loved Bobby Kennedy to a point. I think he was kind of fucking naive about going after the mob, even though they're the ones that got him elected. Having said that, great guy in the sense of a voice of reason. And for him to even still be critical of that goes to show that how already sort of like cynical he was at the process. So, I mean, it makes fucking sense why these books exist. Like, I totally get it.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to discuss all this right now because, he talks about, and I discussed this a little bit in our Hearts in Atlantis episode, but I think it's notable to bring up here, which is he describes the Vietnam War as the steady drumbeat of his life in college. And I think that's the phrase I think that stuck with me most. The idea that, this political and cultural event is so pervasive that it kind of is present in every aspect of your lives. It does remind me, and again, I've said this in Hearts in Atlantis, but I'm going to emphasize, not equating the Trump years with the Vietnam years. Obviously, war is the worst fucking thing. It's much more annoying than, this blathering fool. But the Trump years were a steady drumbeat in their own way, because, and that's amplified by social media. It's amplified by cable news, just by the sense that there's no quiet anymore. There's no escape anymore from these things. But that was the thing about the Trump years was, and I think what people are grateful for now, which is that it's easy to ignore politics again.
Yeah.
And that's what most people want. And that's, I think, that's where I think the steady drumbeat line resonates with me, in that it's very similar today. The kind of the idea that, although that's the thing, is like, I don't know if there is a break now. There is this steady drumbeat of this stuff because it's becoming so much harder to ignore. But I can only imagine what it was like in the 60s, when it just seemed like a major cultural figure was being fucking assassinated like every day. It was such like a tumultuous time. Yeah.
Or like your friends and loved ones are like dying in a
Yes.
war, like my uncle served 2 tours in Vietnam, and I remember hearing stories from my grandmother and my aunt about them just watching the news every day to see if his name would come across as like a casualty list, and it's like this, like, speaking of the Trump years, it's like this rage that is just building and building and building, but you still have to go along every day of your life. It's like 4 fucking years. You can't spend it in just a blind rage all the time. So you either have to get that out or you have to just swallow it, And so that's like, I picked my nickname Gen 2 the Rage for a reason,
Yeah, man.
It's just like this well of rage inside me, and that's why I tend to like write so much feminist shit. Well, I mean, you also think about like not knowing anything about his father, and like having to live in this like state of not really poverty, but like just really not having as much control as you would like to over your life. And like he was talking about getting fired, and so I think it's like there were 2 outlets for him. There was drinking and there was writing,
Yeah.
and one was destructive and one was really constructive, and it was interesting for me to read this as a person who's like, I've got like 8 years now. So I'm kind of to a point where I'm looking back on a lot of my drinking years and kind of the same way that he is. And I've just met some people, and we've started like being in different social situations where there's more drinking around me, and so some of them were asking like why I don't drink anymore. And then they were like, well, we want to hear some gin drunk stories. It's like, I don't think you do. Like, those stories are yeah,
sure. Like, they're not they're not fun, right? Like, for you,
exactly.
like, it's not fun. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a couple that are funny. Like, the way that he laid out some of these stories, like, I have a very similar story about not driving into a tree. Mine involved a boat and a flood, but like it like where I am lucky to be alive, Right. So he's talking about these stories, and it just, as somebody who has survived this period of their life in the same way that I feel like I have kind of survived that period of my life too. And it was really interesting to see the connection and see that understanding of, I was just really fucking angry, and this is another way that I dealt with it, And so that, I don't know what I'm really trying to say here, but it soothed me, and it made me, because he's writing from a person who I feel like is at peace with a lot of this. Even though he is writing about guilt, I think he is writing as a person who has accepted that guilt.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, he's also, one of the things I was thinking about, well, just the tone and the patience and the pacing and all the the qualities of writing, is that after writing these type of memoirs for fictional characters, like, think about like The Body. Think about all the stories in Hearts in Atlantis. Like, think about any of his like more dramatic works, even like The Green Mile, for instance. Like, he's writing with those muscles now, but it's about his own life, and so he knows that you can't just be all darkness, right? Like, he knows that also that's not reality, that reality has some sort of, silver linings and levity in it. And he does a great job in being able to kind of wrestle with those tones. Like, I was cackling at the cone story. There were cones. Like, when he's talking about how he stole the cone, like, the fact that he, in his drunken stupor, like, felt like, oh, fuck these cones. They got in my car. And like, went and took as many
I'm
as he
helping out
could.
the city.
And then he went back to go get more cones, and then the repetition of the cop appearing every almost 900 yards to his house, like that is good writing, and that's also good observations to be able to say, like, yeah, this is a fucked up time in my life, but it's also kind of funny when you look back on it, and that's just a real way to deal with the past sometimes. Like sometimes you just got to sit back and go, yeah, I didn't die. I mean, it could be scary if I sit here and look at one way and go, holy shit, I could have died here. But at the same time, if you look back, and this is what I think all of us do sometimes, you look back and go, man, that's a fucking great story. And they are. I mean, that cone thing is so, it felt like a curb ep, like him getting angry and just being like, there's fucking cones. Like, and the fact that he builds on it even more, which is such a King construct, where he's like, somewhere, the cones got in an attic, and then he went back to the Dower. He's like, well, that place burned down or whatever. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. It's like, that's a King story right there. But I love that stuff.
So, go ahead, Jen.
Well, I was going to say, because I think when he, like, fundamentally, I believe he is a person who believes that we are stronger through connection. But, like, through reading this, I was thinking, I think he is also a person that is able to accept darkness, but also continue searching for light and searching for like hope. I don't think he is a hopeless person.
Oh, no.
And that's why I think I like his King stuff so much better than his Bachman stuff. And I think that comes through here. He's like, this happened. This was a really hard point in my life. But I also think that's why I connect so strongly with his writing and why I analyze the shit out of it. Like I was reading that one passage, Randall, that you mentioned, and I was like, oh shit, he's talking about us analyzing his stuff.
I know, right?
But I think like because he is not intentionally writing with these themes, he's just writing his feelings and then he kind of unifies it. I think that's why this comes out so much and why we're able to connect with it. And he doesn't need to analyze why he wrote it this way. He doesn't need to analyze why I wrote or why he wrote something like Pet Sematary. He doesn't need to analyze that because we get what we need from it. He's gotten what he needed was to get it out in a story form. And what I can take now is what it means for my life,
Isn't it
and
crazy?
that's why I think he's such a strong writer.
But isn't it crazy that idea of him wanting to get it out resulted in the creation of arguably his most important character of all time? I mean, he literally talks about how that anger, that fury, that sort of needing to kind of digress, to outpour emotion created the Dark Man, created Randall Flagg.
Yeah.
Like Randall Flagg came out of this, and it's almost like a weird Dark Half situation with this, because he's talking about how like he really had no other place to kind of vent this stuff, but in the quiet of the Ford room is where he kind of was able to create the Dark Man. And
he wrote a poem that is about the Dark Man, and that was like, the first creation of that character, which is really fun. I love that he details that.
He also writes about Pennywise too, which I think if you look at Pennywise and the Dark Man, they are both like kind of different manifestations of the same like nameless, ever-present fear. Like one is literally like a man who is always walking and following you, which is like the essence of the patriarchy, Maggie. And then Pennywise is this like shape-shifting monster that can be anything that you fear, and it never quite goes away, So I think that it's just such fundamental ways of dealing with fear. And there's one, I think it's in one of the columns where he's talking about this nameless fear.
Yep, that was right about to bring that up. I think that's a great transition to... So we've been talking about how King is reflecting on all of these years, many, many years later. But these 4 columns allow us to see how he was thinking at that time, while he was in college. And so the 4 essays he shares in this... in Hearts in Suspension, 2 are from 1969 from the summer, and then 2 are from, it's like basically the last 2 of the last columns he did while he was in school, and they touch on a lot of the things we've been discussing. Let's kick it off with this one, and we read the ugly one last time.
But
I'll just read little sections of it, but he wrote this one in the summer of 1969 where he talked about, or at least I believe it's the summer. I don't have the date handy.
Yeah, no, it is. It's May 15th, 1969. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, he's talking about being part of an End the War march and being pelted with eggs and being hit in the stomach by somebody. And and I'll just read this little section here because I think it's actually a great little bit of prose that feels very like, how he would write in his novels later. But he says, I'm walking beside a girl in a green skirt and a blue silk blouse now. We are walking toward the chain link fence that separates the gymnasium parking lot from the football field. Dick Lindsay is carrying his bullhorn in his right hand and walking in front of the banner. Eggs begin to fly and rocks. The rocks are all right. Not even the kids in Biafra can eat the rocks. I dodged 2 eggs. Dick Lindsay sees the bullhorn. Uses the bullhorn. He says, keep cool. I do not feel cool. I don't know how I feel. The girl that is walking beside me is hit by an egg between the breasts. Her blue blouse is now assumed a crazy yellow splotch. She says, someone has hit me with something. Her voice is strange. Someone has thrown an egg at her in Orono, Maine. I love just like the poetry of that. It's great. But yeah, I think like and then later on he talks about how, when this is all over, all he can really think about is the egg and the punch, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, it speaks to that idea of the smaller things overwhelming the larger message. Like, it's so hard to stay the course and remember what you're marching for when all you can think of is the egg, you know?
Yeah. Oh, totally.
And that is ugly, because he punctuates all of this with the idea of ugly. He just repeats that word. And it's that corruption of the idea, the curdling into this sort of inert anger that is just like, these people are opposing you, they are attacking you, and it's like what that ultimately does is that distracts from what you're ultimately trying to do.
Which kind of goes in what you're saying about, like, fighting the local versus the federal level, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, and it's also like it's easier just to stay with the status quo too, especially for somebody like King, who is a white man, who is, arguably, other than the draft, not going to face as much oppression as a lot of people. And so it is like the reality of fighting back against a lot of these systems is that you are going to get things thrown at you and you're going to face some hardships, and it's going to be hard because it is hard. Like, tearing all of these systems down is hard, and it's ugly, and just the reality of that. And I love this piece because there's so much feeling there, And the first time I read it, I was like, what is going on here? And then the second time I read it, I was like, oh, this is what it was like to actually be there. And I think he's such a talented writer that he's able to put that on the page in a way that, like, I don't get the unifying message I have coming out of this was just like the experience of being there, which is different than what we were talking about of reflecting on it from. So I like that we are putting these two together because it's just interesting.
Yeah, the immediacy is there. And I think a notable line, and I think this shows the anger and rage he had, which is he did the thing that I think a lot of people do now, which is just call anyone you disagree with a Nazi, which is not helpful. No. And but he said, behind them I see, or he's talking about like, all I see are fraternity sweatshirts. Behind them I see Gestapo figures burning books and Jews. And it's just like, all right, buddy, like these guys are just throwing eggs at you. Like, but that's, I think, very representative of sort of the college mindset. Like, you're angry, you're fresh in this, and you are fucking furious, and you are seeing a systemic problem. But what the eggs do, like what he sort of gets at in the end, what the eggs do is they start to channel your anger towards being mad at individuals rather than systems. And I think that's sort of the real downfall of politics, is becoming mad at specific people rather than systems, and because that's like what the people in power, that's what they're always trying to do is to make you to push the individualist aspect. Like, it's like climate change. Like, corporations don't need to change their process, but you better turn the lights off when you leave a room. You know what I mean? Like, it's on you. It's not on us to actually change the laws that actually destroy this country. It's on you to, don't use hairspray or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
who needs avocado toast?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's the kind of bullshit that hinders things. And so that's what I found interesting about this article. I feel like he's touching on a few different things there, and it's a sophisticated piece, I think, for his age, but also one that's very representative of his age. Like, and this idea of us against them mentality. Great. Mike, any other thoughts? Oh, go ahead, Jen.
I was going to say, there's like, will my son have to kill someone in the name of national pride? That's the line that stood out to me, and possibly just because I have a son. But that's a fear from a position of power. Like, it's not, will I die? Will someone kill me in the name of national pride? It was, will I have to kill someone? So, like, two things there, like recognizing that is a traumatic thing also, and that even if you survive the war, you still carry the trauma of that war. But also, like, this feeling of invincibility. Like, it's not that I'm going to go over a war and I'm going to die. It's that I'm going to go over and I'm going to have to kill someone. And it's just a interesting, real, like, interpretation of this fear, you know?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump.
Oh, no, I love that. Mike, any other thoughts?
No, I just think that this is a really interesting piece in the action of it all. You know, like one of the things I had just mentioned before was when we went into the King's garbage truck is to be able to see that the more actionable prose of like what it was like to be in this era. And this is a perfect example, you know, like it's a perfect example of someone processing not only what just happened, but what does this all mean? And like, I don't think he really has all the answers there yet. And I don't think anyone ever really does, but I think that the emotions are so new and so fresh, and you can see it all in the words here. And I think that's one of the most astounding things especially in the disparity between, or the distinction between what we just read with 501 to this. Like, you do get to see the sort of, it's like almost like going from Richard Dreyfuss in Stand By Me with the essay that we just read to then now watching the kids in the clubhouse.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of how I look at this piece, and especially the piece right afterwards, which he pulled
so
also.
The piece right afterwards is interesting because it was written in July of 1969, and it's about the moon landing. And this is where that idea of the nameless fear creeps in that you mentioned, Jen, which is he's talking about like sitting on his couch drinking a Pabst, like watching this, and then he goes, he has sort of this dream about, or a nightmare, I guess I should say. And he says, then it all changes. Fear grips me. Fear is reflected in the faces of the men out there, beyond the point where anyone can possibly offer them succor. One face floats past the camera, distorted into a lunatic grimace of terror. All rationalism is gone from that face. Only madness is left. And somehow I know, what it is they fear in this dream. Not little green men. A huge tideless wind is swept down on them, and their puny ship, a cyclopean gale from no place that is sweeping them off their neatly computerized orbit and into the gaping, germless maw of deep space itself. What a great little paragraph.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And, but I think that you mentioned, Jen, that idea of nameless fear, which is that ever-present dread. And that's where I think a lot about, like, you know, the steady drumbeat of Vietnam, right? Like, that steady drumbeat is what instills that creeping dread in you. It's the idea that you're never free from this sort of oppressive force that exists outside the walls. And now you're seeing that infect everything. Like, the space, you know, you'd hope that the space race, like going to the moon, could be this celebratory thing. Instead, it's colored by dread, because you're just like, something could go wrong, because something always goes wrong, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I've really been contending with over the last year. Is I think I've talked about it on this archive episode series or one of the episodes, but you know, for the past 14 or 15 years, especially the last 5 years, you know, that my line of work was really giving me like anxiety to the point where like, and that's all it was, you know, work is your day to day, work is what you know, work is what fuels everything that you want. Right. Mm-hmm. Because you need it. You can't have what you want without being able to, you know, to do some muscle and some wet leg work there. And for me, my line of work was just giving me so much anxiety and so much strife that, like, literally it felt like I had like this fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger hand just squeezing my fucking heart, like on a day-to-day basis. And it was inescapable. It like didn't matter like what meds I took, didn't matter what I had. It was always there. It was just always something that I lived with. There was that dread that you're talking about, that constant beat of the drum. And it really did infect every aspect of life, as is what he's talking about here. Is like, this is a marvelous thing. This is a historic moment. And for him, all he can think about is ways to wield it into his own sort of anxieties, which is just his day to day. And that is what happens. Like and that's what happened to me. I mean, fortunately, at some point this year, while cleaning the house, I just noticed that hand isn't squeezing anymore, and you know, things are a lot better. But in that moment, it's inescapable, and literally every aspect of life, even the good stuff, is just tarnished by it. And that's kind of what I feel like maybe what was going on through him, is that idea that there is no promise of a future, the unknown, you know, like I have, you know, we talked so much about how bad things are politically and everything in this country sometimes, but like, and this is what we talked about in the archive, the first archives episode on the King's Garbage Truck, is that like I don't think anyone in this era will ever know the terror of like just seeing what was happening like at that moment. I mean, like the shootings, the fucking fires that were on the streets, the civil rights movement exploding, not knowing where that's going to lead, people dying for causes left and right. And then you have this fucking war that is like run by the military industrial complex where you're just churning in men in and out, and you're reading about inflated results. And then you're reading about, results that people are debating if they're even real in itself, which King talks about in this, in the 5-to-1 essay. And like, how do you not have that hand on your heart?
I know.
Like,
yeah, the next article too, I think touches on that notion. Because if we're talking about, I think that there is this notion of lost innocence in this essay as well. Because when you were young, the idea of landing on the moon, you were probably just like, yeah, this is like the coolest thing in the world. Like if you're young and you haven't had that moment where you've come to distrust the world so much, and I think that's what he longs for. He longs for it in his writing too. Go ahead, John.
Which is, not to pull my soapbox out, but the patriarchy hurts men too. Like I feel like an astronaut is like the pinnacle of our modern like conqueror, and it's like this idealized man who's going to go out and conquer things. And I love that this is a realization that system is based on this false sense of confidence that just being super strong will protect you from everything, and that admitting weakness or admitting fear is weakness. And that fear, that dread, it's like that hand that's squeezing your heart that you're talking about is refusing to, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about culture itself. Like when we refuse to accept the uncontrollable facet of life, like we are just setting ourselves up for that anxiety that is always going to be right behind us, because we know that that's not true. We know that just being strong is not all we need, that there is an element to life that is uncontrollable, and that's what space is, but we still see, like even this year, like all these billionaires trying to go to space to like accomplish this thing that doesn't even really mean anything.
Well, to accomplish what? It's something for their egos, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But if there was that wind that blew them all and they didn't come back, I don't know.
Oh, I'd love it if their spaceship blew up. That would fucking rule. Parody, satire. Okay, let's talk about the next essay. This one was published a year later in May of 1970, and this essay, it's basically him sort of reflecting on his college years. He says, I thought I would devote the last few columns before I don my black, blah, blah, blah. What I want to talk about is the country and the youth of the country, the things I have been most concerned with for the last 4 years, the things all of us have been concerned with, I suppose, some of us for a lot longer than the time it's taken me to get my degree. And so he talks about, I think this is super interesting. He talks about being a kid and sort of watching a lot of these movies and listening to, I think, a lot of the people in his orbit and accepting sort of everything like communists bad, Americans good. Americans always win, so on and so forth. And he talks about the first moment when he realized that America wasn't a superpower, or that like he writes, and not even just America, but just like that a certain kind of idealism can actually fail. He talks about in 1956, the Hungarian Revolt, and he says, I was sickened as any Hungarian when the news that the Russians had completely crushed the revolt thudded home. One thing that John Wayne, Richard Widmark, and Randolph Scott taught me was that the people should have their freedom. And the horrifying 1956 realization that things don't always happen that way outside the movie theaters was a frightening thing. And and then he goes on to talk about Sputnik and the idea of Russia beating us to the moon. And then he talks about Francis Gary Powers. In 1960, the Russians shot his spy plane down over Russia and took Powers prisoner. Eisenhower claimed we were not at fault and then reversed himself. That is the first time, 1960, that I can remember being angry at my country. God damn it, they had lied to me. And after the anger had subsided, I became frightened. He says, you notice how the fear seems to be a rather common denominator in all of this. If the government wanted to lie to me, how could I detect the lie? And I love that line because I think that that's sort of a third eye opening moment, is like if you just trust like whatever the government tells you, and then you look at the history of the U.S. government and how many times they've lied to us, how can you trust anything they say?
And it's such a product of its time too, because nowadays I think about like how, when Bush's America was trying to like really kind of bring back the sort of patriotism and yellow journalism that came with like Pearl Harbor, and which is actually kind of fitting because that year the movie Pearl Harbor came out. And I remember getting in an argument with with one of my best friends about how like he was just like, oh, this movie's just bullshit, sensationalism and nationalism. And I was like, yeah, but it's a big act and all that we should probably be touching upon. And it was so fucking naive because it's like, and it was such an eye-opening moment because like when 9/11 happened, it's not the 40s anymore. It's not an area like this is post Woodward and Bernstein. And it's funny that King's writing about this like literally like years before the Woodward and Bernstein thing would happen, where, you would be able to read about the lies in the newspaper and you would be able to find more about the stuff. But, for him, this is a kid that grew up where the media was on the side of the government. You have even the journalists pretty much on the side of the government. And then,
well, it is now too.
Well, to an extent, like you're not really, it's not as nearly as critical as it was then. And I think of just, that sort of, even just the upbringing, like the education, like the fact that like we're even having debates about critical race theory now. That would never fly back then. I mean, it just wouldn't happen. Like, because, I mean, I think about even my own upbringing. Like, the big joke was always that, like, isn't it kind of funny that, like, all our history books, like, end, like, kind of around, like, World War II, and then they go, like, oh, yeah, Korea happened, and Vietnam happened, and there was an oil crisis, and all this other stuff. But, it's not a big deal. Current president is, yada, yada, yada. And then that was it. And like that's not really. I mean, I guess it's still kind of the case today, but not nearly as much as it was back in probably the 50s and 60s when King was growing up and being educated. So yeah, I love this essay. It kind of really hit hard on just like where I was at in high school when you are starting to kind of, especially when you get that cool professor that's like, this isn't your daddy's history, and gives you a little bit more insight, and you're like, whoa, and then you can go into the deep holes, the rabbit holes that you get on the internet that, the privilege that we have that they didn't necessarily had in the 60s and 70s. So,
yeah.
Well, yeah, he talks too in the 5-to-1 essay about, feeling lied to by Richard Nixon, and like his wife laughing at him and going, I can't believe you believed him, which is a very funny bit. But
he's written about that in introductions too. Like that is not the first time I read it. So that clearly has stuck with him.
I love that he can own that. Like, I think
Me too.
I'm always super embarrassed, like when I, say that I voted for George W. Bush, like, in 2004. But
I did too, so.
Yeah, it was a different time. I was not very smart. And
Nope.
and so, but I think that, I love that he owns it and just kind of says, like, yeah, like I was very much shaped by all these various things in my life. And then, of course, I entered college like a Goldwater Republican. Like, of course I did. Like, if you really look at all the things that I had consumed and who I'd been surrounded with up until that point, because that's the thing, we are shaped by our environment. And I think he just kind of says, I had to go to college and I had to get out of my town and I had to like meet new people and meet these professors and do all this other stuff in order to what he calls the education that or like, how does he phrase it in this essay? He says like the formative factors in the education of an American is what he says in that essay. And I think those are really important. And and so I love that he owns that, and he kind of just says, that was the last straw for me, was I gave Richard Nixon the benefit of the doubt and I feel let down by him. And I think that's a formative moment for any American, is when you start to realize that politicians are lying to you and that they don't care about you. And, that's just like, I feel like we have to go through that. Like, that's what I talk about with Hearts in Atlantis that I love about the book, is it's all about these painful but necessary losses of innocence, right? And there are these moments that enlighten you, but they also steal some of the magic away from the world, and some of the beauty and the kindness away from the world. And that's what I love so much about the book, is I think it really does capture that. And obviously these ideas were lurking around his head during this time.
Yeah.
And I love that you said, like, I love that he can own this, because I feel like so many people can't.
Right. A lot of people just, they pretend they always had the right political opinions.
Exactly.
Right?
Or they just refuse to accept any kind of other, like any kind of enlightenment or like other information. Like because I grew up very Republican too, because that was the house I was raised in, and then it was working in public schools where I just really started to see that other people had different life experiences. And there were a lot of people that had it a lot worse than I did. And I was like, oh shit, well, maybe there is something to this like social safety net kind of thing, or like caring about other people,
Hey, how about caring about other people?
Exactly. But like
oh, sorry, go ahead. I just want to clarify. When I said the right political opinions, I very much put right in hand quotes.
Yeah,
yes.
I certainly do not feel that there is a vacuum with these things.
Because
continue, Jen. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Well, because I do think to that point, Randall, is like I think it's important and especially as you get older, that in addition to having that sort of eyes open about the government, but also just like knowing that like, you know, the negatives are bipartisan. You know, like I look back and like I didn't vote for Bush. I actually didn't even vote for that year because I thought Kerry was such a fucking loser. But I
you were right.
And it was. You know, I also look back at like the 90s and like how I was so supportive of like that Clinton era and everything, and like I was really gung ho and I really wanted like Al Gore. You know, I worked literally on the campaign as a kid, even though I couldn't even vote. What a loser I was. But the thing that I admit now is that like you look back and like, yeah, there were faults in them also. Like they're not fucking perfect. There is no right here. It's it's almost like we'd be better voters and better like, you know, citizens if we acknowledge that like both sides are fucking like they're all filled with like their sins and silver linings, you know, like, and that's kind of a more rational take on looking at it, and that I wish that we could all agree on, but like, you know, that requires nuance, and that doesn't exist in this world anymore. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to digress. I just want to. I agree with you about the you know, there's no right here.
Yeah.
Like,
I just want to emphasize that.
Yeah.
Cool. Last essay is his final one. As he's graduating, and he just does sort of like one of those like live journal quizzes that you used to do, where it's like name, you know, birthday,
I love it, yeah.
Favorite bands, and all that other stuff, which I used to do all the time.
Harry.
Yeah, complexion, Harry.
That one cracked me
so it's fun, but he kind of uses it as a way to I think sort of announce his evolution, like who he is leaving versus who he was when he came in. When it says political views, he says extremely radical, largely due to the fact that nobody seems to listen to you unless you threaten to shut them down, turn them off, or make some kind of trouble.
Which is so timeless. Oh my God. Like that says so much about today. Like,
and then he says favorite color, blue, although during the last 4 years after the death of Robert Kennedy, the death of Martin Luther King, the death of Fred Hampton, the death of 4 young men and women at Kent State, the death of 2 black students at Jackson College, the death of 114 people at My Lai, the entrance of the United States into Cambodia and Laos, after all these things, black in the form of armbands seems much more in vogue. Which, you know, don't get me wrong, I agree with his sentiment, but that's the kind of guy you'd be like, wow, you're fun at parties.
Yeah, but it's such gallows humor for him though too, because
it is. Yeah,
all this is with like a tongue in cheek too. So
absolutely, I agree with that. So it's fun, and then under future prospects, this is kind of what he leaves people with, and I kind of love it. He says hazy, although either nuclear annihilation or environmental strangulation seem to be definite possibilities. This boy has shown evidences of some talent, although at this point, it is impossible to tell if he is just a flash in the pan or if he has real possibilities. It seems obvious that he has learned a great deal at the University of Maine at Orono, although a great deal has contributed to a lessening idealistic fervor rather than a heightening of that characteristic. If a speaker at his birth into the real world mentions changing the world with the bright-eyed vigor of youth, this young man is apt to flip him the bird and walk out, as he does not feel very bright-eyed by this time. In fact, he feels about 2,000 years old. However, since this is the last column he expects to write before his birth into the real world on June 5th, he has asked if he may offer the following bits of advice to the general body politic before driving the garbage truck off into the sunset. I offer them in the spirit with which they were given. Number 1, live peace. Number 2, love as a neighbor today. Number 3, or love a neighbor today. Number 3, if the establishment doesn't like it, then screw them. Take care of yourself, friends.
Hell of a send-off.
I know, it's a hell of a send-off, and it obviously carries a lot of weight. Just, I love him saying, is he a flash in the pan? Obviously not. Like, would literally be one of the most popular writers in the world. And then, but I think the line that really sticks out to me, because it just dovetails with everything we've been discussing, is him just kind of acknowledging a lessening of idealistic fervor rather than a heightening of that characteristic. Yeah. The idea that you are beaten down in life, and college is a time of exploration and discovery and open-mindedness, but it is also a time when you are beat down.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like boot camp or it's like the antithesis of that, to talk about army stuff. But like, it's like, this is where you test out a bunch of stuff. And this is where you try out your ideals and you test them and see how they work. Because there is still kind of a safety net for you, like I think about that with high school too, and middle school. That's when kids like explore being mean to each other and what happens, and so this is kind of like when you explore being really idealistic and really like stepping out of your comfort zone and protesting. And a lot of times there are really negative consequences to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why there's such a big debate about this whole idea of like safe spaces in college. I mean, that's a whole other fucking debate. We don't have to open it, but I do think that that's, you read these articles, you read that sentiment, and there is a lot of arguments as to why we need to have that sort of melting pot of just opinion. Like you need it. Like if that's the most, honestly, like when I think about stuff in college, looking back, I don't remember the specificity of like everything I studied. I remember what it did to my own constitution. And I think that's important. I think that's so important for college. And I think that's one of the things that God, without sounding like a fucking politician, I think that's every citizen here should have that ability to experience, because I think you're better people in society having experienced that. One of the things
got my vote.
Yeah, right. Hey, just go and give me the votes. I will say one of the things that made me laugh so hard, and I tweeted about it, was that King is incredibly, we talk all about like his thumbs up and thumbs down on pop culture stuff, and sometimes he changes the guard. Not music, because he wrote on here, most hated musical groups, Blood, Sweat and Tears, and Chicago, which caused recently I think it was Paul Tremblay wrote about like Chicago or something like that, and he's just like he's like never Chicago. He's like never on my airwaves or whatever, my car.
Never my car.
Yeah, I love that.
Heart a little bit.
Which is so funny.
It
just made me think of like Larry David in the Clear History movie, where he like hates the members of Chicago because he thinks that his girlfriend like had sex with all of them or something like that. I just love that he stayed true to that, and he loves Creedence Clearwater Revival, which, hey, who doesn't? Great band, but.
As we wrap up, I want to just read a couple fun sections from 5 to 1. One is the iconic photo that I feel like goes viral once every 6 months or so of King with a big shaggy beard holding a shotgun.
I went viral with that photo. I was like,
yeah,
why are people retweeting this?
Hey man, it's a great photo. Yeah. And so, but yeah, he tells the story kind of how that happened. Basically, he was really hungover, and one of his photographer friends came over with a shotgun in hand and basically was like, Steve, come on, I'm going to take photos of you. And so this is how King writes about it. When it became clear he wasn't going to go away, I dragged a pair of blue jeans over my threadbare skivvies, donned a t-shirt, and put on a pair of ragged gum rubber boots that only came up to my ankles. I'd had to cut off the tops when the back split open. To this, I added my winter coat, a disintegrating motorcycle jacket with a lot of busted zippers. Head splitting, stomach rolling, I followed Frank as we tramped through the wilds of VZ to a nearby railroad trestle. There he handed me the shotgun, told me to raise it, and said, "Look furious." I did a pretty good job, because I was furious at being turned out of bed with a hangover on a morning cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey. The photo that resulted became a poster on the front page of the main campus. "Study, damn it," was the line that went with it. In the high contrast black and white photograph, I look authentically insane. There is, in fact, an eerie resemblance to a man who had become infamous less than half a year previous, Charles Mills Maddox, more commonly known as Charles Manson. I was not insane, although of course most madmen say that, don't they? But Frank captured something that day just the same. The angry, unquiet spirit of a man who would eventually go on to create Annie Wilkes and Pennywise the Clown.
So cool.
I love that little story. It's great. And then
I have one passage I want to read real quick. I didn't have a chance to squeeze it in before, but as someone who came out of English programs and hated the fact that most of my instructors used to give me shit for wanting to write genre, I always love the fact that King rebels against the hyper illiterate, the literati that goes on. So he has this one thing where he goes, I moved on to Raymond Chandler, McDonald's literary father, and in Philip Marlowe, I found the ultimate outsider, moral but profoundly lonely. Archer and Marlowe spoke to me in a way that few other characters in my assigned reading did, but their work did not appear in any of the assigned texts. I began to feel a deep exasperation for teachers, supposed intellectuals, and literateurs who ignored half the spectrum of American fiction. To me, they seemed like men and women who had deliberately blinded themselves in one eye. It's like, fuck yes, I love that. That is. Yeah. That's my quality of King. just champion and run with all the time whenever I get a chance to. But
Yeah. And we'll talk about that more on writing.
Oh,
we
yeah.
discuss that book as well, yeah. One other quick little section I thought was funny. In It Chapter 2, when the vomiting happens, it's Angel of the Morning, right?
Oh, it is! Yes!
And he mentions that he'll never be able to hear that song without thinking of the assassination of Robert Kennedy. So now I'm having this vision of King sitting in the theater watching It Chapter 2 and that thing vomiting on Eddie, and then King just like
getting up and leaving.
just like getting up and going to the bathroom and crying or something
Oh.
because he's thinking about RFK getting shot. It just made me laugh because I'm just like, what a weird coincidence. He's
That's like
Andy, I wish you'd cleared that with me before you put it in the movie.
I can see that being like a Curb moment too. You know, it's
Yeah.
just like he's I can't do it. That and he just like leaves. Andy's like,
So,
he didn't like the movie. King didn't like the movie. Like,
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on, I mean, I think it was a really fun discussion. Hopefully we haven't alienated any of you listeners with
Yeah.
some of our political opinions, but it's, I think it's all part of the larger conversation. And,
Yeah.
and I think it sort of demanded that kind of conversation, these texts. We're going to revisit the garbage truck again. We won't talk about these, articles, though we may touch on them, but there's plenty of other garbage trucks to touch on. So we'll revisit that sometime next year. But yeah, any other thoughts on these or the essay, Jen?
I have two more. And so I was just cracking up at the thought of him teaching elementary school because he was talking about picking up more classes. I was like, it's not going to be easier. It's going to be harder. No shade to high school teachers. But also just like as a person who writes a monthly column, him writing, like this just shows the talent that he has, you know, and just talking about sitting down and just pounding these things out in a couple of hours and how good they are. And I just was thinking about like how much I obsess over like my writing and just it just blew me away how talented he was. Even seeing like the comparison between 2016 writing and 60s, 70s writing, you know, that he has always been this good. He's just refined it in different ways, you know.
Totally. Yeah.
So,
I like
yeah.
that when he talks about teaching, though. I did like how he likened trying to pivot from teaching to writing your own work as like you're having to do jumper cables.
Yeah.
Because it's so true. Like as being an editor for the last 10 years, I could tell you when it came time to actually sit down and write the stuff myself, I'd rather just lay down.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I used to sing in like a bunch of different community choirs, and then I started teaching music, and I was like, I didn't have a voice anymore, and I didn't have time to learn music. So yeah. It just burns you out. It's great, and if you're a teacher, God bless you.
I think in closing, the sentiments on a lot of this stuff is that not only did I love reading this to find out stuff about Stephen King, because obviously that's what we're here for, we're the Losers Club, right? But I think, you know, what really my greatest takeaway from all of this stuff is just how human it all is, and how much it's said about the human condition and just like where we are, especially even just as Americans, not to sound so patriotic and nationalistic, but it really was kind of astounding to read. And like I did find myself even tearing up at moments because especially reading like Hearts of Atlantis, because there's just so much that like goes by and like time goes by so fast. And it's hard to, God, I'm like getting broken up thinking about it, but like, it's just hard to deal with sometimes, especially like when 20 years go by and you're just like, what the fuck did it all go? Like,
Yeah.
and so it's, I don't know,
Yeah.
it's that just really hit me hard. So I don't even know why, I don't know why I'm like, what a loser, but it just really hit me like really hard. And I think that if you're, even as a constant reader, you should read this, but I think everyone should really kind of read this to kind of get a glimpse of just like, how you deal and contend with like the past, your own past, because God damn it, does it haunt you sometimes, and it's really it's hard to deal with sometimes. So to see someone deal it with themselves, hey, you might get some pointers. But you know.
Yeah, it's like forgiving yourself for who you were when you didn't know better. You know.
Oh man, I feel like I'm always doing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, this was great. I want to thank constant listeners Bryant Burnett and Matt Morris, both of whom help provide some of these scans for us so we could discuss these things. We appreciate it, guys. You're the best. And I think our Hearts in Atlantis month is wrapping up. We've got a Souls Midnight we're going to do that's going to be about some Blackfield shit. It'll be really fun. I swear. We're going to be talking about government projects, things like MK Ultra, and and Project Stargate, which are referenced in the Hearts in Atlantis movie. So it should be a fun conversation. And then we're going to do sort of a year-end wrap-up and just talk about the 2021 as a year in King. And I think all three of us are on that up, yeah?
We are, yeah. And
Yep.
we got your insights too, constant listeners. So,
Yeah, it'll be really fun.
It'll be fun.
So looking forward to that. And yeah, thanks so much for rocking 2021. Not to say that this is the last episode of 2021, but it's one of them. So thank you all. And let's sign off with a long days and a pleasant
night.
Bye, everyone.
I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. But you know you want somebody to treat you good.
This is the end of our show. For now. We hope you enjoyed this production. If you like our programming, consider searching for other bloody disgusting podcasts, such as Creepy, Horror Queers, The Boo Crew, SCP Archives, Nightlight, Margaret's Garden, and more.